To talk more about the secrets behind the glory of Succession, Mia Mask, professor of film at Vassar College in New York, joins me now. Hi, Mia. Welcome to our show. So can you please tell us why we became obsessed with the Roy family? They're like basically a bunch of privileged and hard to like and emotionally damaged people, right? Why is Succession so captivating?
Wonderful question. I think the show is captivating for 4 reasons. The first is that it does a really intelligent, really brilliant job of creating characters you love to hate. And this is not new in film or television, that these characters that are really bad actors are often very charismatic or captivating. In fact, we're familiar with them in terms of the concept of supervillains, if you will. And if you think about a lot of popular television shows, there are a lot of these characters out there as of late and actually going back to, television in the 70s and 80s, where there were characters that were really bad actors, but we found them incredibly charismatic. So whether we're talking about J.R. Ewing from Dallas, or Pete Campbell from Mad Men, Louis De Palma from Taxi, his character from that character, Black Jack Randall from Outlander. There are lots of these sort of super villain characters, Joffrey Baratheon from Game of Thrones, right, that were such evil people or such nefarious people, but we found them really captivating. So that's not new. The second reason I think that the show's kind of fascinating is that it's been able to capitalize on its context. And I use that term with, a bit of the pun intended, meaning that it's come out at a time when we've seen a number of other television shows and movies about powerful dynasties do very well. And the context here is that the writers of Succession have been able to sort of improve on those themes and on those sort of successful patterns in television. So whether we're talking about Dynasty in Dallas from the late 70s and 80s, Empire, about an African-American musical dynasty, a family that is very wealthy from their success in the music industry, or again, even something like as classic as The Godfather, right? There are lots of examples of these families that are dealing with the next generation's ascension to power and lines of descent. So those are a couple of the reasons that I think the show really captivates. The other is just the dark humor, but we can get into that.
In an interview with Vanity Fair, Succession director Mark Mylett says the show is more like a tragedy, but it's also funny. How would you define Succession, and how do you think it contributes to the TV world?
Sure. I think of Succession as a dark comedy and as very much a program that's a send-up. So I think if you're watching it with a set of lenses in which you're taking it too seriously, or you're finding the characters too disturbingly, evil or bad actors, you're missing out on some of the humor of the show. I feel like there are lots of, number one, references to other films and television shows, but also it's a send-up in some ways of this sort of family of modern day robber barons, and in which you have folks like Greg and Tom and Logan Roy as not real fully blown characters, but almost caricatures. And then there are also all of these sort of impossibly awkward moments that happen throughout all of the seasons when they travel abroad or in the office space. Impossibly awkward moments where the often Americans in dealing with Europeans are shown to be terribly garish or inappropriate, or just there are sort of these cultural gaps that don't get bridged. So to miss some of the tongue-in-cheek elements of the show is to miss out on the ways in which it's kind of a parody and a send-up as much as it's a critique. It's certainly a critique of certain kinds of families and certain kinds of capitalistic practices. but it's also a send-up of the Murdochs and the Trumps and fill in the blanks. Many other, even with bits of the Kennedys thrown in there, right? So there's a lot going on, but it's also clearly meant to be tongue-in-cheek.
And well, you just earlier mentioned actually journalist Amber Bryce from Euronews. She also had a comment about like rich people being awful is kind of trendy with productions other than Succession, such as White Lotus and Triangle of Sadness as well. What do you think about that? Is like a trendy production genre now?
That's an interesting analysis. I'm not so sure it's just about rich people being trendy. I don't think that all of a sudden, or as if that's new. Again, I would just want to encourage some of these younger journalists to look at television from the 70s and the 80s. You know, television shows like Dynasty and Dallas were incredibly successful. I think what we're seeing in Succession is a fascinating way in which it's been able to be self-reflexive on and up the ante on the puns and the references and the humor, and it's much more fast-paced and witty. So it's winking at the audience, expecting them to be in on some of the jokes and some of the puns. But I think it as part of a long line or tradition of television shows and even movies in which the wealthy are parodied, mocked, or critiqued for one reason or another.
So last but not least, do you think the show is going to sweep the 2023 Emmy Awards?
It might very well sweep. I mean, I want to encourage people to also think about the fact that in the show, we're seeing that a lot of different types of storytelling and devices, movie devices are being utilized. And I think that's one of the reasons that award programs and television buffs find the show appealing. There are plot devices that may motivate the characters, may seem to be essential, but ultimately are really irrelevant to what the show is about, which is about family, about loss of trust, the absence of love, the absence of certain kinds of restraint on people, and then what they become without those restraints. So I think it may sweep or it may appeal to those in the industry because of the way it is self-referential, reflexive, and calling our attention to elements of the medium.
So Mia Mask, it's been our pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.